This is a meeting to discuss how the SWP sees this and how we want to relate to it, and relate to this development. And we share the enthusiasm of what's taking place, and we want to be part of the discussions about what our vision is and what kind of arguments about what kind of party this can be. As people are probably aware, at the moment there are no formal structures, there are no formal members. Both Corbyn and Zara Sultana have said there will be a conference and talk from the members, but there are no details yet. On the one hand, that's kind of frustrating. On the other hand, it means, in a sense, there's a space to debate what the vision is for this. And discussions, arguments, debates are breaking out, and we want to be part of having these discussions. And I want to touch on a number of them. People will have seen that a new SWP pamphlet has arrived tonight, which is hopefully people will read themselves, but crucially the point is to use it to talk to people around you, to sell to other people, to discuss with other people, and it goes through some of these debates. But let me run through four. Firstly, is the new party simply going to be a party of elections, or is it also going to be a party of struggle? And I think our starting point, and I think this does get a resonance, is to say we don't simply want to have a Labour Party Mark II. There wants to be some reflection on some of the historic problems and limitations of the Labour Party. And actually, there also has to be a reflection on the period that Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party from 2015 to 2019, and I'll touch on that again. We have to learn some of the lessons of it. Now, your party, as it's temporarily called until the conference, will of course stand in elections. But if it only does that, it will be incredibly weakened. It has to take up questions and struggles. It will be strongest if it is part of, if it is rooted in, and if it builds wider movements, struggles, and campaigns, and strikes, and so on. Both because, fundamentally, that's where the power of ordinary people through collective struggles is to change society. It's also what changes working class people. There's going to be a battle of the hearts and minds. How do you simply not reflect the ideas of society, but win people to socialist ideas? Above all, when it's a sense of power and struggle that's taking place in society. And actually, it's precisely movements and struggles that also help create the situation where we can see these kind of more radical political projects. I mean, you cannot explain how Corbyn became Labour leader in 2015 without looking at the mass anti-austerity and anti-war movements of the early 2000s. I don't think you can explain how we're in a situation where your party has been declared and the enthusiasm that's greeted without looking at the Palestine movement. We've seen this incredible mass movement develop over the last 2 years. I mean, probably one of the things that's convinced people like Zara Sultana that there's life outside Labour was the 5 Guards of Independence getting elected. They wouldn't have got elected if we hadn't had an intransigent movement that's had to face down repression from the government. And by the way, you get a sense, don't you, that over the banning of Palestine Action, a non-violent direct action group, the government is under pressure. The government isn't that ban could be beaten. This is the movement that helps generate the potential for these radical alternatives. Now, I don't suppose anybody will argue that your party should replace the Palestine. We don't need the Palestine movement only because of your party. But your party could play a key role in strengthening that movement. I would like to, I mean, there's 800,000 emails. I mean, probably many, if not everybody, has signed up. I've had one email as soon as I did, another one saying this is brilliant. What can I say? I would like an email saying there is a national Palestine demonstration on the 6th of September. Better if it said, and your party is going to have a block of thousands of people, join our banner, it will be here. Better still if it said, and we're going to go on to Parliament Square and act in solidarity with the people who plan to get arrested over, the banning of Palestine. And better still, in my opinion, if Corbyn and Sultana said, they are going to be people sitting in and getting arrested. This is how you will electrify British politics. I think some people will argue this point, which is we don't need an anti-racist movement to deal with to your party will now be the answer. This will be a terrible mistake. Your party's been declared. I woke up to the horrible, horrible news of Farage, emboldened by the High Court decision to shut the hotel in Epping Forest, saying we want protests around the country over asylum. It hasn't just swept it away. We have to continue to build a serious anti-racist movement. Your party, again, can say we are mobilising in your party bloc on the demonstration against Tommy Robinson on the 13th of September. I don't know if people have seen this, although I do recommend people read it. There's been an interview, about 3 interviews, in the New Left Review, which has an online blog called Sidecar, if you want to Google it. And it's done 3 interviews. One with James Snyder, who is part of the team around Corbyn, was when he was the Labour Party leadership, and is clearly one of the key figures in this project. It's also done one with Zara Sultana, which I'll mention in a bit. It's done one with a guy called Andrew Murray, who's been an important figure in the anti-war movement, was again part of Corbyn's office when he was Labour leader. And one of the things that Murray says in that, about this question of struggle and the elections, is, but we don't want to take over the movements. We want to respect the autonomy of the movement. The problem is that this argument can be an excuse for saying you do the movement, we'll do the elections. And it isn't about your party taking over, but it should be about building the mass movements, This is the argument we want to see. And one of the failures and weaknesses of the Corbyn movement in 2015 to 2019 was actually, it was utterly focused on elections and the internal battle inside the Labour Party. And probably even people like Corbyn would say this now. There's a lesson. Second thing is about politics, policies, programmes, however people put it, because it has to be insurgent and combative. Let me give you a couple of examples. The Corbyn movement, when he was Labour leader, was probably at its most insurgent around the 2017 election. Corbyn won 33 votes and so on. One of the weaknesses of that manifesto, though, people sometimes forget this, is that it signed up to NATO and the Trident nuclear missile programme. That has to change. Your party has to be opposed to both NATO and Trident. There is a huge war drive taking place in Europe that says more and more has to be spent on military spending. This is one of the central questions. How can you have a serious argument about welfare, not warfare, if you're signed up to NATO membership? So that's one question. There's also the question, which is incredibly important, of oppression. And here, I think we have to carry the argument that it has to be sharp and intransigent on this question. In the interview that Zara Sultana did for the New Left Review, she says that one of the big mistakes of Corbynism the first time round is that when the pressure came on about the fake anti-Semitism allegations, which revolved around the demand that Labour adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which links it to criticism of Israel. And Corbyn and the people around him stumbled and retreated, and it was a deeply demoralising moment, very, very damaging moment. And she says that was a huge error. And she's absolutely right to say that. And, socialist worker said this at the time. And in the context of the genocide that's taking place, clearly not an inch can be given to this. But I think the lesson is more than just about that particular issue of Israel and so on. It's that when the ruling class find a wedge that they weaponise to attack and put the pressure on, don't run away. Don't run for cover. And what does that mean now? It doesn't only mean the question of Israel. What's the ruling class's attacks? Do you stand with refugees? Do you stand with refugees? Do you think refugees, you cannot give an inch. You cannot give an inch on this question. Every single spokesperson, councillor, MP, candidate for your party will be asked this question. You can't sound equivocal. You can't just say, well, we believe in goodwill and peace to all people. You have to say where you stand on these things. Secondly, what's the other, not the only, but again, what's the other issue that the ruling class have been seeking to weaponise to attack the left? Transphobia. And again, I don't think it's just enough to make generalities. Do you support or do you oppose a Supreme Court judgment that defines women as purely biological. And so where do you stand on this question? You cannot give an inch on these, and we want to take these arguments into the new party. Now, third argument, which I'll touch on, is there has been discussion about whether the new party, your party, should form an electoral alliance with the Greens. I know we've got the We Demand Change event coming up in Manchester and so on. There may well be people who raise these kind of questions. What do we say about it? And really, you know, the argument is that we need unity, the left's always divided, we need unity. The reason why I think it would be a huge mistake, and we should argue against it, is fundamentally because of this, the absolute key to politics, if you want to build something serious, is insurgency. Any party that comes across as just part of the mainstream setup, a bit more to the left and so on, isn't going to tap into that huge mood of discontent. In fact, you abandon it to other forces. You have to be insurgent. And the fundamental problem with the Greens is, I don't think they're an insurgent force. I think they become increasingly a conventional part of the prevailing setup. And that's also reflected in some of the positions. The Greens have now accepted NATO membership. They think Britain should be part of NATO. They are, of course, critical of Israel and so on, but they accept Israel's right to exist. I'm sorry, any state that commits genocide does not have a right to exist. Right? Yeah. This is not a radical. I mean, people are probably aware there's an election taking place in the leadership of the Greens. I think it ends in a couple of weeks. Zach Polanski, I think fundamentally, he's put his finger on that, hasn't he? He said the problem is the Greens have become a conventional party. Let's see if he wins, how much can we change things, and so on and so forth. But the question has to be asked at the end of the day. I mean, some people did go and join the Greens when he announced his challenge, just as before your party was split. But why didn't 800,000 people sign up for that project? And the reason is I think people sense that the Greens aren't really the vehicle. And the danger with an electoral alliance with the Greens is, again, it acts to blunt and constrain that radical insurgency, which is the only hope to really reshape and transform politics. The fourth debate is the question of how the party organises, democracy and accountability. Now, I think there are some people on the left who this is their almost sole focus and so on, and you know, it isn't our sole focus. But what do we say about it? And it seems to me the most important points are, firstly, it cannot be based on a kind of top-down, plebiscitary internet democracy where some group of unaccountable people say, you know, here's what you can vote for, yes or no. There has to be the development. I mean, really, we're talking about development of proper branches, with elected leaderships, who elect delegates to policy-making conferences, and all those kind of things. In other words, it can't be a party that essentially fears its own activists, tries to go over their head. I mean, there's an interesting point that's made in this pamphlet. One of the writers, Charlie Kimber, follows French politics a lot, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, people may have heard of, who actually does have that whiff of, you know, he understands you need to be insurgent. In fact, in questions like Gaza, he's got better. So there's a lot of good things about it, right? There are no branches. There is no democracy inside the France Insoumise, his party. Essentially, Mélenchon decides. This cannot be our vision, right? This cannot be vision. And actually, the way that you develop new layers of activists and expand the activist base is by having a dynamic insurgent party that connects to and engages with wider struggles. Because struggles always throw up new people who can be drawn into the political leadership of an organisation. It also has to be a party that can hold its elected representatives, councillors, MPs and so on, to account. This was a critical question, of course, inside the Labour Party. And to give you an example, I can't remember his name, the independent MP for Birmingham was elected with Corbyn. It's an ongoing strike, the Birmingham bin strike, very, very sharp, probably the most important industrial dispute taking place in Britain against a Labour council and effectively a Labour government. He at one point said, we want the army to come in to clean up the streets. effectively to undermine this right. Now, I think there has to be a way of calling people to account on that. Criticising them, pressuring them, if necessary, disciplining them, and so on. Otherwise, we will reproduce a situation where you elect people and they're not accountable to any kind of democratic control from below. Now, final couple of things I want to say are, one is, look, we will discuss all of this and so on, people say what they think. Here's the hard bit, we don't just want to have that discussion between ourselves, right? But trying to find those 40,000 people in Manchester that, nobody's handing out membership lists or email lists and so on and so forth. So we have to think about ways of finding that audience. I know there was a meeting here last night called the Your Party Supporters. I think there's about 100 people. It sounds very much like I know the number of comrades there. I'd be interested to hear what people say. I know that Corbyn is speaking in Oldham next week, and then Blackburn. What can we do about relating, especially to the one in Oldham? Mark will hopefully say something about this initiative again. Now, there was 100 people at the meeting last week. That's a serious meeting. It's not 40,000. But this is where we're at the moment. And I think we have to think about how we find and relate to that broader audience. And this pamphlet is one tool in that process as well. I should also say this. Some people will be aware that there are local elections taking place next May in the big cities, places like Manchester, which might seem maybe not the most exciting things, or you'd be wrong. I'll tell you what, if you wake up on, I don't know, I can't remember if it's 1st of May, whatever it is, wake up on the 2nd of May and it's, I just assumed there'd be a left-wing challenge to Labour, and instead it's Reform and maybe some Greens. Because I assume that your party will now be doing all of this. Don't assume that. Maybe it will. There's no guarantee, actually. It's very, very unclear. And therefore, the discussions that we've been having about putting forward some comrades, but also trying to talk to other parts of the left to make sure that there is an insurgent challenge, has to continue. We can't drop off the agenda, however difficult it is. The final point I want to make is, we share the enthusiasm. We want to be part of relating to this. That doesn't mean we're going to dissolve the SWP. To be honest, it's very unclear. Will an organisation like the SWP be allowed to join? We don't know the answer to this. We cannot assume it will be. So let's see. But politically, we're not dissolving because why? Because I'm against amnesia. I'm against an approach that says this is fantastic, it's hugely exciting, but let's never imagine any attempt to create a more radical party has taken place. In the last decade or so alone, we've seen, to name just a few, Syriza in Greece, Podemos in the Spanish state, Linke in Germany, there have been the whole radical pink tide in Latin America and so on. There is a balance sheet. And again, parties that are sometimes talked about, Syriza used to say, we are the expression of the struggle. But really what they meant is we want to draw people from the struggle into focusing on getting us elected. And when they got elected, they discovered they had no power against the unelected centres of capital and the state. And we have to learn these lessons, that fundamentally the question of struggle is also where there is an alternative centre of power for working class people to resist, challenge and ultimately overthrow those unelected centres of capital and so on. And therefore, the question of building revolutionary organisations remains. We have to relate to, and we'll probably end up as a kind of militant minority in the discussions around the new party. But those are discussions we want to have with hundreds of thousands of people, and that's a huge opportunity we want to seize.